Okay. So good morning. My name is Melita. I'm a financial journalist at ENCA. I produce and anchor business news at 1 and 2 o'clock. I've been in the industry for about 7 years, and I must say I really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot over the years, not just in the production, because I did start off in print. So I started off in print, working for Forbes Africa and then Forbes Africa and then Money, and I'm at ENCA. So over the years, I've covered mainly news and financial news, and I also look into industries as well as entrepreneurship in the country.
We are interested in your experiences of producing. We're interested in the constraints that you sense. We are also interested in the experiences that you may think lie in your wake. We're interested in you speaking about power and gender. We're interested in you speaking about race and decolonization of newsrooms, and stories and issues of power and representation.
So over the years, we have actually covered journalism. We find that, especially the industry that I'm in, it's a very niche industry. You find that it's not much dominated, especially by Black females. And that's been a very major concern for me over the years. It's the same faces that you see on TV. It's the same voices that you hear on radio, and it's also the same that you come across in the industry in print, and that's been a major concern. And it's fine. You find that we all just moving around the same companies, and you find that there seems to be a lot of barriers within the industry itself to actually even get in, because it's a very white male dominated industry, and that's something that I've picked up for many years, especially when I started off working for Forbes Africa. And it's not as easy to get into the industry, especially financial journalism, as you would assume. And I think that's one of the things we need to, as future leaders in the industry, to actually look at and just try to actually break down those barriers and be able to lift up those younger journalists that come after us. Another concern of mine pertaining to the industry is the way that sometimes we report and the writing style, or the way that we portray information to the viewers and readers. For example, I'll give you an example about corruption, government, because I cover business or the economy. So when we speak about such things that happen within government institutions, we call it. But when we speak about things that happen, for instance, with Steinhoff or in the private sector, we then call the same incident that happened there within the government sphere. We call it, when we're reporting on company news, we then call it, for example, irregular accounting irregularities. So for me, that's always just been a question of why is it that we use these terms, and why do we continue to use those terms? Because if we don't change these terms, then that means the system is not changing itself. And that's the type of information that we are portraying and giving out to our viewers and to our readers. Okay, this is how we. And certain words are affiliated with certain color or race or certain industries, and I feel something that we really do need to look into moving forward.
And why would they? What in your view is causing people to call public sector corruption by its name, the hard name corruption, and private sector corruption is called malfeasance, irregular governance, or irregular accounting, the more gentle expression? Why would that be?
I think it's mainly because, I wouldn't say because it's a racial thing. I think it's more about assuming that because the government handles people's money, citizens' money like such as taxes, then when they nab on that, it becomes a form of corruption. But the same applies when you're talking about a company that's registered, that's listed on the JSE. They could do the same thing. We saw how Steinhoff basically lost so many people's money based on accounting irregularities. But when we speak of that, we wouldn't say that Mark is basically corrupt, but we say that there was an accounting irregularity then was found, but it's corruption at the end of the day. But we don't use such terms. And I think that's one of the things that is concerning. And I that's one of the reasons why most journalists tend to use those. They don't associate crime, they don't associate fraud and corruption with money that is not related to tax in a sense.
Could it be perhaps that financial journalism itself has couched itself in the narratives that serve the highly financialized corporate sector of South Africa, especially the listed sector?
Pardon me, can you repeat the question?
Could it be that financial journalism itself has couched itself as a force to uphold the interests of financial journalism and, the interests of the highly financialized corporate sector, especially the listed sector?
Oh, that's true. That's very true. So one of the things which I've picked up is that when we're going through financial reports, we don't go into depth and look at it. For instance, I studied BCom accounting, so I have an accounting background. Fortunately for me, my other peers don't have the same background as I have. So you find that maintained on the press release, which has been given by the companies. Obviously, narrate whatever stories they want to narrate. And I think that it's become so evident, especially with the Steinhoff story, so I should repeat it again, that there's so many things we were not even supposed to miss as journalists. And apart from the auditors, we were also supposed to do their job. But then if we as journalists as well are able to look at those things and assume that, okay, they could also make mistakes, there could be fraud that's happening here as well, then there wouldn't be these issues that we find arise after so many years, and then there are no solutions for them, such as Tongat. And you find that even there's never any form of accountability that's taken.
Can we speak about skill? Because you've talked about your accounting training. Can we speak about skill and non-skill? Do Black women have to demonstrate a higher degree of skill and actual provable bulletproof qualification? Whereas the same doesn't apply for white males. And therefore, the industry has a dim eye to Black female skills and actually casts some doubt over their capacities in areas like technology and finance. I just wanted to share that I had a former student whom I taught financial journalism to, and he actually ended up in the industry as my boss, and a very nice boss for that matter. But I wondered about perceptions and valuations of Black female skill.
Very true. So I'm going to give an example about myself. So when I graduated from NMU, I then went to work for a year, and thereafter I went and studied FITS as well. That's when I majored in financial journalism, and I studied the story of money as well. But the main reason for me doing that was so that I could be able to enter those doors, because I realized that for the year that I was working after my graduation, I was just a business journalist, and I was just reporting on leadership and businesses, and I wanted to report more on companies and more on the markets, because that was more of my interest. So that's why I had to upskill myself. But I knew that my peers in the industry, especially my male peers, they didn't have the same qualifications or the need or feel the need to do that. I even went for the Sandham School of Journalism. It's a summer school, Sandham has, which they have in November, where they actually train upcoming journalists in industry, on financial reporting. So I even had to partake in such things so that I could be able to at least have a voice in the industry and be able to be heard when I walk into a room. But I realized as I've worked in the industry and I've gone up the rank, most of my senior journalists as well, they don't have such skills. You find that some of them studied psychology, for instance, and that's all they did. And they were in the industry and they became even our editors at this point. And you ask yourself, but how? And then you find yourself having to impart certain skills onto them. They are the ones that are supposed to be imparting skills onto you. So there is a gap, and I feel like are not spoken about enough. I think it's because of the fear of losing your job or saying the wrong things at the wrong time. But there just are not enough open discussions about such challenges within the industry. And I feel like it's not going to be happening anytime soon. So I suppose that's why we're having this conversation, so that we could actually break down those barriers.
Noma, are you able to join us? Yeah, have you been following aspects of this conversation, and what's your take?
I think I tapped in when Melita was talking about upskilling herself, and the question about white counterparts. I think I smiled at that question because I was having a colleague of mine from a different media company. We were having the same conversation just yesterday, where this is a Black female. She works for the competition, but we are, being political journalists, we're always in the same space. So they made a recent appointment, our competition, and the title of, or the job description of the white female that they appointed was a metro reporter. But then what we're seeing is that she's tapping into what this particular journalist's job is. And we had the conversation about, Jonga, like, what's happening? Because we are seeing you guys moving in the same space. And then she said that basically, yeah, she feels like no offense to anyone, but what she said was the fact that she, as a Black female in this particular field, she's not going to basically give a hand up to a white colleague, because for one, she knows, even though it's not said, that this is someone who makes probably twice what she makes, and yet there's an expectation there that she must now upskill this person, and yet when it comes to her, she's not afforded the same opportunities, the salary discrepancies, and all the like. So these are some of the things that we deal with in the industry, but we don't talk about it because, like Melita said, people don't want to be fired, or people don't want to come across as the angry Black woman who's always complaining. But and also just across the board, men aren't held to the same standards that women are. And like Melita says, she studied in order to just advance herself in what she wanted to do. And then for me, as I said earlier, I'm now at the Sowetan. I'm going on a year. Prior to that, I was at the Herald in the Eastern Cape, where I did a lot of council reporting. You do annual budgets, you report on the national budget, the provincial budget. And I found myself, I had to actually go to your competition, Nelson Mandela University's business school, in order to do a crash course in accounting. And I did that for 6 months, and I obtained the certificate at the end of the day. And I literally thought, it's almost, I didn't think that I was actually going to proper business school to do like proper accounting. I thought it's like a 3-day thing. And then here I am having to write exams, and at the end of the 6 months. So these are the things that we are constantly having to do. And what I do know is that none of my male counterparts were ever put through the same thing. But then at the end of the day, it's a skill that I've got. I can at least see a budget and I know what is what. It helped me at the end of the day. So yeah, that was just my contribution to what Melita was saying.
What would it take? This is a question to both of you. What would it take? What kind of changes would it take in your environments for these inequities and these injustices, these microaggressions against Black women not to occur?
Anita, you want to take it?
Yeah, I'll take it. I think we need to have more open discussions without the fear of one losing their job, without the fear of one being ostracized within the workplace, because we do know in our industry, you dare say the wrong things at the wrong time, you will find yourself out in a couple of months. So I think that's my 2 cents on that. But then I also think that there needs to be some form of transparency within the industry. We need to be honest and say that this is being done without something having to trend on Twitter or the public having to put it out. I know a particular media house that's always questioned on social media, like, why is it that the staff there is always leaving? And none of the people that work there will say anything, not even amongst themselves, because they know the things that are happening within the media house. But it's the fear. It's the fear of just saying the wrong things at the wrong time. So I think that what we need in this industry is a more open discussion without the fear of being ostracized or losing your job at this point.
Noma?
So just from my company, you will have Manco, or you'll have these executive meetings within the company. And then you just see who's walking into these meetings. It'll probably be 15 men and only 1 female. And even at the very top of these companies, there's still very much male dominated. And there aren't a lot of, for one, there aren't a lot of female editors in these spaces as well. So it's a constant conversation that needs to happen, and it won't just happen with women sitting around talking by themselves, but it needs there needs to be a deliberate transformation agenda that is on the table. I would say, Melita, they just need to pull a Disc CEO type of vibe, but then he withdrew that. So that's what I would say. But you need deliberate action. You need the people at the top to, I suppose, like I say, be deliberate in their appointments, in what they say, in how they act, and what is actually taking place on the ground. I'll go to what Melita said earlier on about when you speak out, you're fired within the next couple of months or whatever. The reality is that even though you've got editors from different media houses or news editors from different media houses, these are friends. And they sit together on a Friday, they drink, and they talk about us. And all of a sudden, you're blacklisted and you are unemployable because you dared to speak out. And it's like she says, we need, there needs to be more transparency. And it's a very gatekeeping industry, if I can't find a better word, but it really is a very gatekeeping industry. So unfortunately, these are people who sit together, they drink, they discuss their reporters, that one said this, or that one said that. And even you as a reporter in the newsroom, you're told, but just be careful in how you approach things. Don't be the loud black woman. It's almost like you're typecast, and then that is what you are forever going forward. That is what you are. So there needs to be constant conversations, and it needs to come from the very top. Otherwise, there won't be any change.
May I comment on 2 ironies, and perhaps you could assist me in reflecting on these comments that I'm about to make? That it seems to me that there's been a failure of 2 key provisions in the South African Constitution. The first one being the freedom of expression, that it's supposed to be the culture of newsrooms, is replaced in newsrooms by what you are saying, with a culture of fear. and a silencing, a censorship of sorts. Then the Employment Equity Act, which is supposed to, which has its echoes in the Constitution too, and the Constitution is concerned primarily with righting the imbalances of the past, whether they are gender imbalances or historical racial imbalances. And those two instruments of equity making, for lack of a better phrase, are merely ignored in daily praxis in the way the institutions operate. Could you please comment on that?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, no, I'll take this one. Absolutely true. And that is my biggest concern about this industry. And I have been thinking about visiting the industry in the past 2 years, because I realized that we are supposed to be the voice for the people. But when so if you're a reporter, let's say like for Norma, she's a political reporter and there's a protest wherever, and then she goes to that protest, she's speaking to the people, and she's hearing what it is, what they want to say. If I go and I do a reporting on unions and I hear what let's say clothes workers are striking about, and I hear the grievances and their representation, we accept for them. But when it comes to journalism, when I go back into my office, I know that I can't be as vocal as the people that I report on. And I actually admire that, because you're like, wow, these people are actually free. They're really free South Africans that are able to say what they want to say about their company and not scared, But for us as journalists, who are supposed to be people that are vocal, who are supposed to be people that are standing up for human rights, are the ones that we realize, at the end of the day, that we actually the ones that are most oppressed, and there's nothing we can do about it. Even my family members always know, like, what are you guys doing in this street?
Noma?
I think it's what Melita says. You go out there, you report, you hear people demanding 30%, and inside you're thinking, if only I could go out and do the same. For one, we're not organized. We're not unionized. And I think it also speaks to the pay disparity that's within the industry, because what you have in this industry is that you've got your superstar or your star reporters, your star journalists, and those are people who make really, really, really good money. And for some, I remember within the company a few years ago, there was an attempt at, there were retrenchments, and there was an attempt at being unionized. And then when D-Day came to strike, not everyone came to the party. And then you find that those who did strike, they were ostracized, some were retrenched in that process. So as long as we're not speaking with one voice, as long as there are those who are good, and those who are good are considered the star reporters or the star journalists of the industry, I don't think anything's going to change. It's a sad reality, unfortunately. You have, or within the same company, you have maybe everyone is not happy, but then Sowetan Business Day, Sunday Times will have talks. Okay, guys, we're striking. And then when D-Day comes, Sowetan strikes, Sunday Times doesn't strike. And then your bosses, obviously, they see them. They are like maybe their biggest money maker. So if they're saying they're okay, then stuff the rest. So that's literally how it is in the industry. If we're not all speaking with one voice, and nothing's going to change. And it's, I think in terms of changing the narrative, I'm now even moving away from the equity, but in terms of just changing the narrative, papers need to also be deliberate in the stories that they tell, and how to sort of shift that focus, because back when I was at the Herald, so I'm just now moving away to some of the earlier topics that maybe I'd missed out. I had an issue, and this is also how social media also reacts to the stories that are out there. I'm sure everyone knows the name. What is she? I think it's Jade Panayoto.
Yes.
The lady, yes. There were two incidences that happened almost around the same time. Or Jade Panayoto, what happened to her happened. She rests in peace. But then there was also another killing of a woman in Motherwell. She was a policewoman. She was shot by her husband, and there was just generally, and it's not funny, but there was just generally no outcry. I mean, Jade was plastered on our front pages on TV screens, and what we did at the time at the Herald, we were just, I think it's not decolonializing the industry, but it's just making making deliberate decisions in how you tell stories. There was just so much outcry where Jade was concerned, and there was just not as much. The voice on the other side wasn't as loud, and so what the Herald did was we literally plastered this Black woman from Motherwell on our front pages, and we were like, "You're going to see her. She's also important. She's just as important as Jade." So we just need to be deliberate in everything that we do in terms of breaking the stereotype. And yeah, that's just what I wanted to put through.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing with us the politics of truth telling from the view of Black female journalists, and for discussing with us how these discourses and praxis of the little inequities, the microaggressions that move along colonial lines are entombed and embedded in content and in text and in the narratives that our newspapers put out there into the public sphere. My last question to you is I'll read to you a quote. And I just want you to please comment on the quote, and then we'll open up for questions from the floor. And of course, it's Foucault. Excuse me, he comes from the global north, France to be particular. We must seize once and for all to describe the effects of power in negative terms. Even though we know power excludes, it represses, it censors, it abstracts, it masks, it conceals. In fact, power produces, it reproduces reality, it produces domains and objects and rituals of truth. Could you please comment on that in the light of the fact that the media has extraordinary power in modern democratic societies?
Okay, so let me speak about, I think, let me speak about what I think, how to use our platform and power in a meaningful way and how it impacts positively on society. So this is going back to my time at the Herald. I think it's how we use our voices very honestly, and how it impacts on society. So there was I wrote a story once upon a time with my colleague, Rochelle Decol. She's now the editor. This was a report that was in the council agenda, and this spoke to just outright looting of municipal funds. We had this contractor, it was a waste management contract. You had this contractor who, there was just a whole lot of corruption that happened, and they quoted like obscene amounts of money. And I think it was one of the most impactful stories that I did, which resulted in people actually being arrested for that particular story that we wrote. It was a story, and one of the people actually who were meant to have been arrested, but not say unfortunately, but he died of COVID. That was the former mayor, Mongameli Bobani. And actually on the day of his funeral was the day that he was meant to have been arrested. So when you look at that, that was a waste management contract, right? So, and then go to Nelson Mandela Bay today, you go to our townships, you see how filthy that they actually are. And I think one of those stories, it wasn't a story that splashed across the country or even the city, but what that story did was it got the attention of our authorities, and instead of people getting away with looting funds, they were actually arrested, and with the municipality now trying to recoup the funds. So even though sometimes it may seem like a thankless job, at the end of the day, in some way or another, people are held responsible for their actions. And I think as long as we continue telling those stories, I think people will not get away with looting public funds that are meant to help assist ordinary, because that's what we do. We try and bring a voice to ordinary South Africans, from something small as filling a pothole to fixing a sewage leak. I think for as long as we are able, we need to tell whatever story it is that needs telling. And I know for some people, maybe fixing a pothole or fixing a block drain is nothing, but for a woman who lives in Zwide, who's had literal poo filling her yard for 3 months without it being fixed, for her to go to the Herald and within a week that is fixed, that changes someone's life. And I think for as long as we can positively impact someone's life, we should continue doing what we do, even though for most of the time we are dragged for filth by politicians on social media. But for as long as I know that whatever I'm writing can positively impact someone's life, and I know it does, I'll continue doing what I'm doing.
Thank you very much. May I acknowledge Professor Zandi Carol Lesame, who's joining us from UNISA. We taught together for a brief season at Forte. Hello, Zandi. You're most welcome. Let me open the floor to questions.
A question. Fear of speaking out in newsrooms, as they were alluding to, does it translate in the way you report on stories? In other words, because you fear you're speaking out in newsrooms, you might be fired. Does it make you? Do you feel the same way when you report on corruption or irregular expenditure, whatever the case may be? Do you fear, do you so fearful of that you don't write what you really want to write? And you tone it down in a sense. How do you deal with that?
I have not.
Let me get you some more questions. There are many people put up their hands, and maybe you can deal with maybe 4 questions or 3.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks, sir. My question is, don't you think it's about time that we develop news values as part of decolonizing journalistic practices? Because you spoke about 2 death incidences, whereby the newspapers in the main South Africa focused mainly on the death of Jimmy Panayoki at the expense of a poor, quote unquote, a poor black woman whose death came courtesy of the circumstances about the women abuse. Don't you think it's about time that we develop our very own news values?
Thank you so much for your presentations. My question is, so yes, we have very important questions around coloniality, but also around your experience of producing here today, under the context of digital changes, shifting industries. If there was any way that we could better prepare students entering into journalistic fields, do you have any recommendations of what would be the best way to prepare for this moment of the history?
Okay.
No, you can go and Melita can follow.
Okay. I think, okay, let me start with the question of fear of being reprimanded or toning down stories. Fortunately for myself, I've not been in a situation where I've ever been told to tone down what I'm writing. There is no fear on my end in terms of the story that I'm trying to put out. We are not ever, I suppose, we've got, what is this, editorial freedom in how we put our stories, but there was an incident once upon a time where I felt like you directed, this happened. There was an incident. I felt like it was just propaganda, or it was just this one pro group. I genuinely felt like it's not a story, it's a non-story. But because I'm given a directive to write the story, I felt that you are telling me to do something, and I'm saying I'm not comfortable, but you are still pushing me to do whatever it is that you want me to do. And then what I said was, I'm not attaching my name to that. So I was like, just for not being, I suppose, reprimanded for disregarding a strict instruction that I've been given by my boss. I'm like, okay, fine, I respect that. But also what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to attach my name to something that I don't believe in. And that was sort of the compromise that we reached. So yeah, that was one incident that I can recall. I do take pride in what I put out. And at times it's not always the best, but I will attach my name to something I believe in. And then moving on to developing our news, our very own news values. So, okay, let's take it to this week. There's been a surge in child kidnappings, kids being found dead, young children, young girls, young children, young Black girls being found dead days later. So what Sowetan did was, we just didn't want to put just figures out there, statistics out there. I'm not sure if you would have seen, if you guys have seen the front pages. So what we did was, we just put some of the faces of the young children who have died just this year alone. And I think the caption was, how many more must die? It was just to put it to you so that it just did something when you viewed that front page. It was just to actually just put the faces of these children out there so that people know, so that people see, so that they can feel even like 5% of what the families of these children were doing. And so aside from that, we've also gone beyond that to actually, it's a front cover today, to speak to the police minister to actually say, what is the plan? What are you guys doing? Children are continuously dying. And hopefully that then, so what Cele said was that basically cops spend 6 months, 8 months chasing after criminals. We catch them, we arrest them. But what happens with the stroke of a pen, judge releases them out on bail, and they go on to commit even more heinous crimes. So what then does is it creates conversation around the country as to should there be change in our justice system? Where are the gaps? So you need to, so as Sowetans, we've taken a deliberate stance to be on the side of the people. And so that, I think that's what any newsroom can do, is just to choose, if you're going to take a side, take the side of the people. So I think that's what one can do. And this actually came from like the very top. It came from my editor. She's like, no, man, we can't just week in, week out report about a child being killed in Limpopo, a child being killed in the Free State, or a child being killed somewhere in the East Rand. So we need to actually send out a message out there. And I think it speaks to the kind of values that Sowetan has, and is also trying to put out there to the rest of the country. And then what's the last question, Taryn's question? I'm producing media for a South African audience today. So I am a print journalist. I'm a print journalist, and that's not where it stops. I'm a print politics journalist. So now people keep saying newspapers are dying, but they're not. We're still here. But what now? The strategy has changed. It's multimedia now. So even though I will write premium content for print, but you'll find me online. You'll find me on Twitter tweeting. You'll find me there with videos. And basically that's how the industry is changing. It's so fast paced for everyone, not just print and not just TV reporters. We're all doing the same thing, because now you've got this beast that you must feed. You've got audiences. You can't sit in an 8-hour council meeting and not say anything, because literally what you do get is you've got people atting you at Twitter asking what is happening. So now we are constantly churning out bits and pieces of news out there, but always accuracy, quality is paramount. Your videos that you put out there must have context. So it's a never-changing world. And just like with the story that I mentioned earlier on with the front page with the babies. So what they did was, because the story is gaining traction, it was on TV, it's reported about on TV, it's reported about in the radio. So what you then do, how do you then keep the story going? How do you keep the interest? So after that, once that article was out on the day, the editors sat down, they're like, okay, how can we continue? Also, you need engagement on the website. So what they did do was they put out a 3-minute video with the editor, with the journalist, and with the news editor speaking on how it felt, or what the experience was like on producing that page. So I would say they all, okay, Twitter's a mess, but there are things, there are newsworthy things that happen there. So, and reporters must be constantly on the lookout, or students must be constantly on the lookout about what's happening in the news on Twitter, what's trending. It could be topical to them, but depending on where they are, if they're producing local news, people in wherever they are, they love reading about themselves. They love seeing themselves on the screen. They love listening to themselves on radio. So they must always try and find a local story to tell in order to continue gauging the audience, to grow the audience before even branching out. You must be strong where you publish before you can branch out. That's what I'd say. But yeah, we're no longer a one media medium. It's print, it's digital, it's online, social media. That's where.
And Melita? Melita?
Sorry, I was just trying to unmute it. So just adding on to the point that Noma had raised now about citizen journalism, I'm sorry, about preparing learners. What I would like to say is that it's very important for future journalists and students at this point to also really consider citizen journalism, because it is taking over the country. It is taking over news. It started doing that when I was still a student, even, and it's become worse over the days. You'd find that things would be breaking on Twitter before they've even been broken by a journalist in the newsroom, and they would still be trying to find out or verify the information whether or not it's true. But one of the ways in which journalists can also prepare themselves for the industry and the way that it has been shaped is for them to just focus really mainly on what it is that they want to send out, what's the message that they want to send out to the audience, and to just stick to it and keep their head down and concentrate on that, and actually just being an up value journalist. And that's something that which I've tried to just concentrate on over the years, so that I don't get derailed and I just focus on the story, and also remember why you got into the industry as well, why you wanted to be in the industry, because it is a very much passion-driven industry. So the only way in which you can survive in this industry is if you love what you're doing, and that you wouldn't wake up and do anything else, because it's not about the money. It's when you go into this industry, don't think that you're going to be earning a lot of money, but it is about storytelling, and you need to understand what message do you want to send across to your audience. So I just want to talk about the first question that was raised, and then that was about editorial freedom. For me, this is something that's very concerning in the industry right now. It's been concerning since the SABC days, when we saw what was happening in the days of Saudi. I believe it's still concerning even now, because the spotlight is not on many private media houses. But editorial freedom is something that most people do desire in the newsroom. We all aspire to put our name behind something that we are proud of, and that we want to say that it's always clean. But I've had 2 experiences in my 7-year career where I realized sometimes you don't go out there and say what it is that you really want to say, but you are keeping the lights on, or otherwise the building will be turned into a parking lot, because there are people that are of higher power than us. And that is the reality of South Africa. And that's why we are still in the state that we are in, despite democracy despite us being in democracy for 28 years. So that's something that is still concerning. But we do aspire to continue to be clean journalists, and to remember why we became journalists, and focus on actually sending that message to our audience. But it's not always the case. And I've also had incidents where it's happened, like Norma herself has even said that she's had incidents herself in her newsroom. And there's no place to report this. And it all goes back to what we said earlier about how there's no uniform voice in the industry, and how we are just not doing things the correct way, the way that we should be doing them. But we are there to tell other people how they should be doing things and how they should be running things. We are a watchdog for other people, but there's no watchdog for us. And that's something very concerning. So that's one of the things. But when it comes to the point that is another point that was raised on developing our own news values, I think it is important. It is high time that we start developing our own news values, but at the same time, it's also time that we also start developing, or we start opening up our own media houses, because we do know that there aren't that many media houses that are of people of color in the industry. So I think that it's high time that we start working towards that. We've learned the ropes. We know what's happening. We know how ads work. It's time that now, when we are training younger journalists or students at schools, we're not just teaching them about, being a journalist and working and doing this, but we're also training them about the business of media itself. And that's something I actually wish that I had learned when I was still a student, where you can actually understand the business of it and not just understand the stories that you have to give out to the people. And so for me, that's something that is very important, because we do want a better future for all of us. We want a better future for our children and those that come after us in the industry as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess that's the end of our panel. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, Noma. Is anybody who has something else to share?
Hi.
Noma?
No, it's just one last point that I wanted to make. Just I think since 2020 or even beyond that, but it's only through discussions that I found out, I think I realized how depressed journalists, some journalists are. They're actually on antidepressants, and I was actually very shocked. I think at some point I probably could have been on antidepressants myself, but I've just got I don't like taking pills for any reasons, even for headaches. But I think the younger generation, they are much more vocal, and they will not take a lot of things that we might be taking now. So I would maybe just advise them just to find their core group or support, and not shy away from maybe going to therapy, just to make sure that they get things out of their system, because we are exposed to like a lot of things. So just a recent incident myself, I know people were laughing about this COPE press conference that recently happened about a month ago, where we saw people fighting, and what that Lakota was doing a media briefing, and then there was a different faction from the party that came in. But the scary, I was at the press conference, and the scary thing about that is we were in this room, and that's when I realized the importance of having media briefings with an exit door, because for the first 2 minutes, we literally didn't know what was happening. And from how these people came into the room, it seemed like they had guns or something. We just didn't know. There was just a lot of, it was just scary. You had 2 minutes or a minute where we were all huddled in one corner, just like, okay, fine, this is it. And then after we said, okay, no, these are just punches, people are fighting, then we relaxed, and then we took out our phones and started filming. But I realized when I got back to the office, and I'm like, no, actually, this it just did something to me that I hadn't realized in that moment, because the journalists who were there, we were like even texting each other, chat, all right? Because in the moment, because we like, just honestly, we didn't know. So I think it's very important to come back, speak to someone, debrief, get it out of your system, instead of just sitting with bottled emotions, and then all of a sudden you're just in a funk, your work is dipping, you don't know what's happening. So therapy, talking about it, therapy, mental health is quite key. So I would encourage, the safety of journalists is critical. It's extremely critical. So I think they mustn't just chase a story, but they must take the time to check in with themselves to make sure that they're okay. Because exit doors, guys, exit doors. That's all.
I totally agree. Sorry, Sis Tandy. I totally agree with Norma. Even in my newsroom, you find that a lot of people are actually on antidepressants. And it once happened that even a colleague of mine was suspended for 3 months because they had accepted the wrong company. And during that period, she ended up, in a hospital because of depression. And it's just stress. And ever since, she's been taking like a lot of tablets just to survive, and sometimes tablets just to sleep. And it's a very stressful environment for a lot of people. So I think that it's very important to really educate younger journalists about the environment, that they should have some form of outlet for the work that which they will experience. Even your colleague, Noma, once covered a story about, I think it was in Soweto, but a family was found dead during the time. And after she was reporting on the story, how did you feel walking into that house that has had those dead bodies for the long and it was like it was smiley firstly, and I had to go back put on that. But I realized after, and she said to me that she realized afterwards that that story had actually impacted her, because she never received any form of counseling after that, and there is no form of counseling that is available or that's made to avail in any newsroom in South Africa at this point. You go and do your job, you see dead bodies. That's one of the reasons why I stopped covering general news, because when I was an intern, I saw the body of a 5-year-old child that was hanging outside a car, and they had a car accident with the grandfather, and they both died on the scene. So, and that's why I was like, I don't ever want to cover stories such as this in my career, and that's how I got to move on. But it's traumatizing. It's traumatizing things that you just can't go back, and you can't go back from it. You can't grow from, because it traumatizes you for life. So more needs to be done in our industry, and I feel like very little is being done, there's very little focus on the media industry unless it comes to the form and the way that they report. But nothing is actually being done about the employees in this industry, about the people and the soldiers that are actually on the ground reporting on those stories for the people. So if we are not mentally well, are not emotionally well, how are we supposed to actually give out proper news to people? Because the power starts from here. We are supposed to be watchdogs. That's our main mandate, to be watchdogs, but nobody's watching over us at this point.
Thank you so much. I see that Professor Lesame has got a hand up, and maybe Zandi, you want to say something about South Africa having some of the most traumatized journalists in the world, as being one of the most violent societies in the world too. Zandi, over to you.
Hi, Tans. I'm gonna be informal then, because that's how we call each other Tans and Tans. So thank you for the very warm welcome. I just wanted to concur with the ladies about the safety of journalists. Yesterday on Black Wednesday, it became so apparent that although journalists in general are having, careers that have got threats in them, but this problem is much pronounced when it comes to women. So I think as we move along this journey, we have to be very, very concerned about that and discuss ways in which female journalists can be protected. But I think it's one of the major issues that we have to address. It's not only a South African problem, it's a global problem. And we've seen journalists being killed in other parts of the country, and it depresses you in South Africa when you are not in that country. It affects you, because you were a journalist and you know what it is to be a journalist. So we need to, I concur with Norma, we need to talk to each other and also see how we can, support each other and advise each other as journalists in terms of how we can take care of these realities and threats in our lives. And thank you for having me until tomorrow, the end of this very informative event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.